Ana Maria.
I am Mariana Macedo.
And today we will have our third guest invite in with Pushing the Glass Ceiling.
So hi, Brooke. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Brooke Foucault Wells. I'm an associate professor and interim chair of the Department of Communication Studies at Northeastern University. And I'm also one of the core faculty members of the Network Science Institute at Northeastern.
So this blog is related to our behind the scenes paths that you have taken during your career. We know that you are involved in many organizations and you are one of the role models and the leaders of both sides of networks, so network science and social networks. So we want to know first how you got involved with these organizations and how you arrived to this stage.
Oh, of course. So I was very fortunate. In graduate school, I studied with Noshir Contractor at Northwestern University, and he is one of the organizers and sort of original founders on both sides, right? So I rather rarely was kind of brought up in both social networks and more network science techniques. So as a social scientist by training, I obviously veer more towards the social network analysis, but I was taught in graduate school and continued to develop through my research some of the more computational techniques. I like to tell people I don't invent those techniques, but I apply them to interesting social problems. The other piece of this, of course, is that I was trained early on to be a good collaborator. So if you look at who I publish with, there's a zillion different names. And that's by design, right? So no one person can hold all the information that they're gonna need in order to be successful in an interdisciplinary field. And so you need to learn how to collaborate and how to choose your collaborations. And that just comes with practice, that you need to have some good collaborations and some probably you need to have some bad ones in order to figure out what works and what doesn't work. But it is through excellent collaborators that I'm able to really go beyond my own skill set and bridge particularly into the more sort of computational complex systems side of the network science world.
We know that your work is about diversity and also about gender and activism, but also your research teams are composed by diverse groups. So that's so nice for all of us, and we want to know which expectations you had as a student that you could imply that you can see now as supervisor that you go for those more diverse groups or.
Yeah. So this one it's such a puzzle to me that this is so hard for everyone, right? So I have incredible students from all different kinds of backgrounds and incredible collaborators from all different kinds of backgrounds. So it's so obvious to me that, talent and intellectual, power is distributed around the world in all kinds of bodies and all kinds of situations. So I think if you start with that premise, it would be foolish not to recruit diverse people. That said, I think one of the reasons that I've been more successful in assembling a diverse team in my own lab in particular is because I'm pretty straightforward about that, right? So I understand that that's not the reality everywhere, that there are, dimensions of discrimination that make it harder for certain kinds of people in academia. And that can be all kinds of people, right? So based on your race, your gender, your sexual orientation, your financial well-being, and even more than that. So kind of centering that in all of my public communication, I think people find me because I, say things online about, how things are unfair for some people or how it might be harder. And I, above anything else, look for people who can contribute to a culture in my lab that will be welcoming and inclusive, that obviously I care if you have technical skills, I care if you can do the work, but frankly, like I can teach you those things, right? So if you're a little bit weaker on some of that stuff and you're willing to learn, that's no problem. But if you are not going to be receptive to interacting with all kinds of different people, it's not going to work out.
Yeah, that's great. So what were your perspectives as a student that changed when you became a supervisor?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think I had no idea how many different jobs professors have to do. So I think, frankly, a lot of what I interpreted as bad behavior or ill will was actually just like people being overextended or a little bit incompetent at parts of their job. So I, just to give you a picture of what goes on, I get hundreds of emails a day, right? So my lack of replying to email is really almost never because I don't like the message or I don't want to engage. It's because I just can't keep up. I'm expected to somehow be an accountant on all my grants, which is not something I'm trained to do, and I am very terrible at. Right. So things like budget allocations, which really do impact. I try to get it right, at least on the student stipends, but because it's really important. But if we run long or run short on money, that's almost always because I just don't know how to do it well. Obviously, I have to produce the work, right? So I'm writing and speaking and mentoring people and doing all that stuff. You have to plan ahead and apply for grants. You have to be strategic, think about your thinking, and then also very pragmatic in the classroom, right? So you have to, keep up to date on like all the basic stuff and try, if you're going to be an engaging professor, to come up with interesting new examples that connect to real life. And that's just, the kind of day job stuff. There's also all the service that happens outside, just keeping things going and hiring committees. And not to mention like my life and my family and everything else. So it's just a lot. It's a lot. And I remember as a graduate student being frustrated because I didn't get feedback in a timely manner, or like some, check didn't get reimbursed as fast as I wanted or needed it to. And I think a lot of that is because there's just a lot of moving parts for people to keep track of.
Talking about motherhood and life during these times, of pandemic times, how pandemic has impacted your work and how you have struggled with things and go beyond those struggles.
Yeah. I mean, there's no way that the pandemic hasn't impacted my work. The two big ways, of course, are a shift in research that I could do or wanted to do. So part of my research program looks at face-to-face interactions, which we still can't really do, right? So if you have to wear masks and things like that, you can't be doing that kind of work. So we had to just overhaul that whole program and think about what can we do given all the constraints. I also wanted to be able to contribute to some of the dialogue on COVID. So we used some of our same kinds of methods that we use to track activists and social change movements in order to track people who are particularly influential at distributing good quality COVID information. So who could people turn to for advice? And that was a pretty rapid transformation. But then, of course, there's the huge thing where suddenly I had no childcare, and I did the math at one point, and it was something like 1,300 hours of childcare that I lost, which is, if you do the math out, is 6 working months, right? So I basically did my whole job in half the amount of time that I would normally have available. So it gave me a lot of empathy for people who are facing all kinds of circumstances. Obviously, like childcare was a disaster and continues to be a pretty rough, frankly. But there's all kinds of reasons why people can't sort of give their full selves at their work. So I definitely have a lot more empathy for that. I have a lot more empathy for mental health struggles, right? I don't know how anyone could go through this pandemic and not be depressed, anxious, unable to focus and all that. So I I certainly think differently about those kinds of experiences. And also I'm, at least for me, have come through mostly the other side now. So I also have a new appreciation for the temporariness of some of that stuff. you know, some of those things can linger forever, but sometimes people just need a little boost for a really short window of time. I mean, for me, it really did amount to maybe 3 months where things were really, really bad. But we came through the other side. So, you know, I've been talking more publicly recently about how we have to, in academia, there's this very intense window of time between kind of as you're finishing up your PhD and before you get tenure. So that's maybe 6 to 10 years. We really need to do a better job of making sure that a 3-month disruption doesn't derail people's career. It's ridiculous. Everyone's going to experience something, and to get people through those 3 months or those 6 months where they really do need extra support without throwing away their entire academic career seems like a goal that we could meet. So I hope we can work on that now that we all hopefully have newfound empathy for what that might be like.
That's awesome. So I'm curious to know a little bit about what you think, as we had this experience of education, online educational learning. What do you think it will be the future?
Yeah, I mean, pretty paradoxically, I think we discovered in this past year that we can both deliver content really effectively online, and also that we really badly need to be in person sometimes. And you know, one of the things I think revealed is that throughout, you know, our academic institutions and our professional societies, that certainly part of it is content, right? So transmitting information between one another, and folks have gotten really good. I've been super impressed at all the conference videos and the classroom content that people are generating. I also really love how shareable that stuff is. So people can share their videos around, or we can reuse videos. So I might use a conference video inside my classroom and so on. So that part's really nice. And we all just miss each other so much. So, I mean, any job, and arguably, especially academia, where we need to be looking after our minds, right, and creating kind of new ideas, and you know, relies really a lot on these supportive social networks, and we need to curate them. We need to build them. And the last year really showed us what happens when we don't have that, you know, when academia becomes transactional, where it's like, I'm going to deliver information to you and you're going to accept the information or maybe pay me for it. And that's just not what it is. I mean, it's very obvious now that that's not what academia is, that part of it is creating intellectual community, is creating, you know, connections along the intersections of different kinds of disciplines or different kinds of ways of thinking about the world.
So I have a question, Brooke. Talking about this creation of community and linking and connections, how are your patterns of collaboration? Like,
so full disclosure, I tend to collaborate with friends. So I think collaborations work best when you know, you don't have to be friends, but you do have to truly value the other person's contribution, right? Because a lot of early collaboration is just taking on faith that the other person knows what the heck they're talking about. So, but I think really beautiful things come when we all trust each other in that way, and we can find the space in between and the connections. I do love to collaborate with students. I think students come with fresh ideas and different ways of thinking about the world. They also, frankly, have sharper tech skills than me now. I'm getting to the age where I just don't keep up anymore. So I think that's great. And increasingly, and thanks to a lot of the technology that we have available to us, international collaborations. It's pretty ridiculous that so much of what we know about, say, social movement networks just comes out of the US and Europe. That obviously there are social movements everywhere in the world.
So nowadays, what do you believe we as a student should be doing more?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to give advice here because I think my advice is inconsistent with what the institutions kind of demand of students. But if I could give one piece of advice to today's graduate students, become really good at setting and policing your own boundaries. So institutions will take and take and take, and you need to say no to things, and you need to carve out time for yourself. A lot of the burnout and kind of exhaustion, the anxiety that we're seeing in students I think is a result of this, I don't know, this myth that if you just work hard enough, that you'll be successful at this job. There is obviously a certain level of hard work that is necessary to be successful, but beyond that, you know, it's just a lottery at some point that there are so few tenured faculty positions, even the competitive postdocs, right? There are just so few people who get those roles that you need to be good enough to be in the pool to be considered. But then speaking from the side of people who review those applications, for any one that we hire, there were 100 that were qualified, right? So having, for me, it was always useful to cultivate an exit plan. Like what is the thing, and I still do it? Like, what is the thing that I will do if this is no longer a thing I want to do? And I think academia can be all consuming in that it is your passion, it's your identity, it's the thing that you've spent 30 years of your life doing, right? And so having a plan for what happens if it doesn't work out, I think helps you understand where the boundaries are, right? So that thing that you're asking me to do right now, it's too much. I'm going to say no. And if that somehow is the reason that I don't succeed in this field, like I have another plan for what I could do. And I know that's really hard.
Talking about speaking aloud these problems, do you have any advice for us, like your young students, in a way to deal with those anxieties with their supervisors or their, like, the research communities that you applied to yours?
Yeah, I mean, I saw this beautiful tweet, and I'm sorry I can't remember who posted it, but it said, you know, I think when we're picking our supervisors and we're picking our graduate programs, we think about our best days. Don't do that. Think about your worst days, right? So something in the course of your graduate career or your postdoc is going to go wrong. Like, whose office do you want to go into and cry? Because things are really hard. So I think that helps a lot if you have an empathetic supervisor we can't always fix everything, obviously, but we can give you the space to grieve, and we can give you the space that you need to get better. So I think that is a good piece of advice. The other piece of advice, and the one I'm trying to internalize myself, is to, you know, don't work above your pay grade, I think is the idiom, right? So there are certain kinds of problems that you can solve, and there are certain kinds of problems you can contribute solutions to or ideas for. And then there's some problems that you just can't. And so, yeah, you know, if we get bogged down in trying to make everything fair for everyone all the time, you can be exhausted. So work on the issues that you can control. Maybe work on the issues, you know, pick an issue that you care very much about, even if you don't think you can control it, and work on that. But if you try to solve, you know, income inequality, racial injustice, environmental calamity, and political polarization, you'll exhaust yourself. No one can do that. So pick one and focus on it, and then work on the things that you actually have control over.
Regarding that, because you work with a lot of social problems, as you mentioned, so gender, race, and activism.
Mm-hmm.
There is a way that, like, or a moment that you felt exhausted of all this information of, like, heavy topics going in your research?
So everything feels very impossible most of the time, but every so often you get a win. And actually, WINS is a great example of that for me. That, you know, as a woman in network science, I was able to carve a path where I could make it a little bit easier for other women in network science. And it's not perfect, and we still have work to do and all that, but that's a place where I have enough power and influence that I can make a change, which doesn't mean I'm going to set aside all the other places where I think we need changes, but it's nice to have one where it feels like it's working at least a little bit. Yeah, so this was an idea. So Kate Karangis, who's the director of the Network Science Institute at Northeastern, was the general chair of ComplaNet a few years back. And this was an idea that she had and came to me for help in the logistics of implementing a kind of activist-oriented organization. And we really saw this need that there are a lot of women doing network science and complex system science. And there was no organization, unlike, say, Women in AI or, some of our parallel fields. And there was no place to come together. We would end up coming together, sometimes literally in the ladies' bathroom. At conferences, people would connect. So we decided to formalize it. We got just a little bit of funding to like host a party, literally. So that's where it started. And at that first event, I had so many women come up to me and say, this is the first time I've been in a room full of scientific women, right? On the social science side, it's a little more common that we have rooms of all women or mostly women. So when people were saying that, like, oh, this is a thing we need to do, right? But, I think when we first started it, we weren't, maybe it would be a listserv or just like, social events at conferences. And we realized that it's a really important support network for people, that there are people who maybe don't have a woman mentor outside of WINS, or maybe don't have other women students or postdocs that they can talk to. And there are, for women and non-binary people, there are special kinds of issues that we just need spaces to talk about, and we need to bring up. So, someday, I guess the dream of all activist oriented or social change oriented organizations is that we become useless in the future, that we don't actually need to exist. But I think we're a long way before we get there.
And we would like to know your thought about why we have this gender gap in research performance, or how many papers we have, how many patents we have.
Well, so many. Well, first of all, thank you for, you are all now the leaders of WINS. So thank you for the great work. I can only take credit for the start of it, not for all the amazing things it's become. But if my legacy is, successful WINS, and I can go to a conference in 20 years and just see women all over the place, then I have been an enormous success in my career. So thank you for carrying that torch. On the gender gap, so I think so many things. So many things. I think it's much more systemic than any of us would like to believe. I agree. It starts before we have kids. I think it probably starts when we're 5 years old. So, I was in 6th grade, literally my math teacher told me, because I got a B+ in honors math, that maybe I didn't have a head for numbers. So I think we're told we spend our whole lives, and I think it's very hard to appreciate the kind of gaslighting that happens to women, and if it doesn't happen to you, it's so subtle, right? That it's taken me my whole adult life to kind of have words to identify exactly what happened to me. And you don't feel like you quite belong, but you don't know why. Maybe you really don't belong, and so you should leave. And that happens to so many people throughout their adolescence and their undergraduate years. I mean, there are just 1,000 signals for why I shouldn't be good with numbers. I shouldn't be good with computing. And then layer on top of that some existing misogyny and sexism, right? Things like having to worry about what you wear at a conference so you don't reveal certain parts of your body that would make you get taken less seriously, wondering, I think there's probably all of us who are women or non-binary people have wondered if a certain conference location is safe for us to travel to alone. Can I go to that event because I'd have to walk back home or back to my hotel late at night? I think those are non-trivial things, right? So all of those things combined just make it a little bit harder for women. And then if you layer on top of that the fact that we don't have great mentors, we don't have examples of success ahead of us, or not as many, then it kind of insidiously seeps into your brain, like, okay, I guess I don't belong. Or there, maybe not even that I don't belong, but there are easier things to do. Like, why would I put myself through this? And then, on top of all that, there is the non-trivial issue of women who want to have kids. That happens to happen in that same window of time where we're expected to be at our maximal productivity, at our peak career, where major career decisions are happening. And I think a lot of people, myself included, like think twice about, I know I want to have kids in the future. So do I really want to go all out and I try to have this high pressure job, or do I want to just take a slightly easier path that would make it more possible? So you're like planning ahead before you're even like even remotely close to being pregnant or to having babies, right? But you're thinking about that future. So creating ways where younger women can see like, oh, actually this is possible, or there are sort of reasonable ways to accommodate this very short window in time. Like, I'm almost to the end of it now. My youngest kid is 10. So it really does not last all that long where your kids are like, high needs and really need you around. So I think it's all those things all combined together that make it a bit challenging. So I think there's lots of problems to solve, but maybe the ones to sort of lean on first are these issues around solving some of the leave and making it possible for people to be near their families when they have very young kids, and maybe some of this remote work technology will help with that. Yeah. So if you are at the start of a PhD in network science or computer science or complex systems, you've already accomplished so much, right? So you've already run the gauntlet of a lot of this stuff. So you're already successful. I mean, remember that you had to work harder to get to this point than many of your peers in your program. So you're already better than them. And because if you feel a little different, you probably are a little different by your race, your gender, your socioeconomic background, and that means that you have something unique to contribute. So if you don't stay in academia, if you decide to go to industry, that's wonderful. Like those gifts can be given there as well. So I would encourage you to kind of hold on to those pieces of yourself that you think are valuable, that maybe some people or some systems are telling you to get rid of, because that's exactly where your contribution is. So if we all hold on to those and put them out in the world, I think we're all better off for it.
Thank you so much, Brooke. It was our pleasure to have you here. Thank you. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Brooke. Bye bye.
Thank you so much, Brooke. That was amazing.
Bye, everyone.